The button isn't working.
Oh, the your gato.
Yeah, it screwed something up, so I think the rest of it will work, but I'll have to switch this one part.
Okay.
Oh, and our mics are live right now.
Oh, they're live.
Yeah. Hi everyone in the chats and watching this as the countdown goes. You don't normally hear us talking.
Yeah, how's it going?
Not everything is working right now, so
That actually works out okay though.
right.
Luckily, we weren't saying anything terrible.
Right. we constantly say such terrible things. What, is this 96?
I think 95.
95. All right. Oh, it started over. I'm waiting for it to do it. All right. 48-hour art check, round 95. Already off to a great start.
When the macros fail.
Right.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah. Here we are.
There we
95.
are.
And much like many, when they hit 95, things are starting to fall apart a little bit.
Stop working as well as they used to. Oh boy. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what happened. Normally I push a button and it does about this macro of like 6 different things, and I push that button and everything broke. And so I don't know. Anyway.
But the 48-hour art check proceeds.
Yes, it does, regardless of whether anything's working or not.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, should we jump in?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, I'll get started. Not nearly what I needed to or what I wanted to get to for a number of reasons, but this is where I'm at, and well, I don't know why stuff is still flying across the screen, but I have 3 panels down, penciled, and I've got kind of the layout of everything for this page. So I should be able to knock out like the rough pencils for the rest of the page after this. But
sweet.
That's pretty much it. And then I also got, I'm going to allow myself a diversion here. I got that animation done and the music. I cut together, I opened GarageBand, cut together some stuff. And so here's what that looks like. The premiere, the YouTube premiere of this.
I love that.
Josh, you won't be able to hear it, but I'll send it to you later.
Okay.
This is your time.
Yeah, so that's that.
Really cool.
Yeah, I like it. It's about 2 seconds longer than I wanted it to be, but I couldn't figure out a place to cut it. So I'm pretty happy with it.
That's awesome. I can't wait to actually hear the audio and stuff, and I'm glad you kind of figured that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like GarageBand is like an audio version of After Effects, so it's just like this Pandora's box of what's capable and possible. It's a lot of fun to mess with. So
Yeah, it's massively addicting. I have 0 to none somewhere in between those two musical ability, and so that would be a rabbit hole that would take me years to bear fruit on anything. But it was fun doing what I did. I actually had to call Josh and say, "Hey Josh, I need you to tell me what keys on my keyboard to press to make these notes." He's like, "All right, let me figure it out." And then he did, and then I figured it out. It was great. It was awesome. So you probably saved me 3 or 4 hours of not getting it right.
well, who knows, man? I mean, like the weird thing is, like even in that process, I used to use GarageBand like all the time, like years ago, and then they changed the platform. So in the process of doing that, I ended up like wasting like an hour or two after we talked just messing around, because I was like, oh, I forgot about this, and then like the volume, and then you can do this thing and you can do the sample, and I was like, oh my gosh, like it was this beautiful rabbit hole of playing with software that I really enjoy, and then realizing, wait a minute, I have to like get to building stuff. But I like those moments; those are fun. So programs like that, Yeah, that's my experience with After Effects so far too. But
Yeah.
that the intro looks great.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, so I got let's see, I got two panels inked for the next page. So that leaves me with one panel left. And then I also did the lettering for the next page of the short comic. And then the two panels were for Quarterly Stories, my graphic novel. So tonight, well, anyhow, we'll get into goals. But I feel pretty good about my progress, although I still have to do my 100 days tonight to kind of stay on point.
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah, that's looking really good. I like that.
So
And
what
I'm
were
massively impressed with you're juggling two comics at the same time right now, which it would break my brain, I think. But yeah, it's awesome.
it's fun. It's fun to do.
Yeah. What were you gonna say?
Oh, so what were your struggles? I think you were kind of getting into it a little bit
Yeah,
before we started
I've had
recording.
I've had a cold all last week, and I think it's moved into a sinus infection. So last night I was planning on getting a ton of stuff done, and I normally go to bed somewhere between like 11:30 and 2, and I went to bed at 8:30 because like the behind my eyes hurt, and my face hurt, and my teeth hurt, and I had a headache, and like my shoulder was cramping up, and I looked all those up, and it's like sinus infection. And I was like, oh, cool, that makes sense. And I've never had one before. And that was really painful. So I took.
Wait, oh, you've never had a sinus infection. So just a quick tip:
Yeah.
make a phone appointment with whoever your insurance is,
Okay.
and get the Z Pack.
Okay.
The Z Pack is like it's like they give you the antibiotics worth of like 3 weeks in like I think it's like a quantity of like 3 days or something like that,
Oh, okay.
and it'll just kick it right out. But with sinus infections, you're not going to sleep them off. They're
Oh, yeah, because that's what I normally do is I just try to get more sleep and drink a lot of water.
yeah, sinus infection. You gotta have antibiotics because otherwise it'll linger for like a month.
Okay.
It's the worst.
Yeah,
So
that
anyhow,
sounds good.
that's my tip because I've gotten a few. And the Z Pack, mention it to your doctor.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. How about challenges for you?
So okay. Oh wow. I guess people in the chats are very impressed by your intro.
Oh, thanks.
Alpha Proto said, "Whoa, very creative," and Sasha said, "Very cool." So,
Oh, thanks, guys.
um, yeah, it's exciting, man, what you can do. So my challenges were basically just juggling, like time balancing, all that, um, and just trying to like in the last week or so, I've been trying to kind of reinvigorate hope and kind of targeting big things that are a little bit more of long shots that might have more potential to pay off, and I've kind of reawakened a little bit of that, and so it's been kind of fun to have that like stir up again and kind of create possibilities and stuff. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's good to do too. Like even if they're super long shots, I think it's good to swing for the fences and to remind yourself that it's possible.
Yeah, because I mean, even if you don't, hit it, it's like you can remember that it's still possible to try, which is a really good thing. Because I do think that's probably my biggest challenge getting older, um, and just kind of being around in the industry longer. It's like you do start to get jaded,
Yeah.
and so I think that keeping some of that energy is super important. Because like that's kind of the foundational stuff that got us anywhere to begin with. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's true. Um, so I already mentioned my plans, but my plans are am going to finish this page up tonight as far as the rough pencils. And excuse me, and then try to kick this whatever it is, sinus infection, cold deal, and all that. So and then from there, if I've got some time after finishing this page and I'm on track, I'll start roughing out the next page. So that will put me halfway there in the pencils, and then I can, because I think I'm going to be able to ink this really fast, because the pencils are coming together in a way that just makes me feel like that it's really working. Like I think I've thought about this in my mind,
Yeah.
For like a month, and so like I'm not struggling as much with the layout as I normally would because I think I've been laying it out in my head. I'm starting to realize. So
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it does look like that first page and then this one as it's starting, it does look like you're on track to have that core structure there.
yeah,
And so it's like all that pre-planning and thinking, and um it's funny, but it's like one of those things that feels like delaying at the beginning.
right,
And it's definitely one of those like tortoise and hare kind of things where out of nowhere you're going to be really quickly executing it because you have all that groundwork there.
yeah,
So that's how it's done.
cool. So how about you? What are your plans?
So my plans are to finish that page. So by the next time, hopefully by the next time we have this, I'll have a page up on quarterlystories.com, or at least scanned and cleaned up, ready to go. And then finishing the rough lettering and starting to um, work in the pencils and rough out starting to do actual roughs of the drawings too.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where I'd like to be by the next time we do this check.
Cool.
But I'm also recording with my band tomorrow, so we will see how much time. It's going to be interesting to see if I can keep with it when getting home tomorrow after that. So,
Yeah.
see.
Cool. Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So what do we want to talk about?
I feel like there was a topic that came up yesterday when we were chatting.
Oh, and I forgot to write it down. We were talking about semiotics. Sorry, like when we were chatting, I think I crashed immediately after that. We were talking about semiotics, and we were talking about some sort of judgment call on them. Oh, yeah. We're going to talk about the use of symbols and when it is cliche and when it is not. So when it's okay to use symbols and when it's not. You want to do that?
Sure. Sounds
okay.
Good.
Let's do the podcast intro version of that.
Mm-hmm.
So today's topic is cliche versus original. And so on the last episode, we talked about semiotics, which is the symbol system that can come about because of, like everybody in the culture deciding that something means something visually. And there's a danger in defaulting to those when you don't think about it, and that becoming trite or cliche or overused. But there's also a danger on the other side of that, where if you don't communicate clearly, nobody has any idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, as you do this, Josh, because you've been in this game longer than I have. How do you decide when to use a symbol, and when to avoid it? How do you decide when you are being cliche or original, and how much originality do you think can water something down to the point where it's just unintelligible? I'm curious about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's funny because it's a really complicated topic just to even get into originality versus cliche, because there's an argument to be made, and a pretty strong one, that there really is nothing original.
Right.
There's that old saying of like pretty much like there's no story that can't be boiled down to one of Shakespeare's plays. Like he pretty much hit all genres.
Yeah.
And that's relatively true. So originality tends to have a lot to do with the voice that's telling a story, and then also in the way that it's ordered or told. And so, like, if you think of it as like there are only so many chords or notes, it's just really the arrangement of the notes that kind of makes the originality of the piece. unless you've invented a completely new instrument, and in that case, you're at that luxurious point where pretty much anything you do is going to be pretty original.
Yeah.
Um, I For me, I find it really interesting because like when I was doing T-shirts, this was particularly problematic because a lot of the time, what you're doing with graphic design and in cartooning is you are trying to convey an idea very quickly and visually, and usually your first thought when you're thinking about a visual solution is the most obvious and usually the most cliche.
Yeah.
Um, and so there's this sweet spot when you're concepting, you're trying to come up with a successful concept for a shirt where where you kind of like think of something and it's so good that you assume somebody must have done it, and
Yeah.
you look and no one has.
Yeah.
And that's this beautiful moment that I used to chase when that was the primary way I'd make money, because if I could touch on one of those things, 9 times out of 10, that would make me a lot of money.
Yeah.
Um, uh, it, the thing that I think, the thing that I would recommend, and you'll notice like I'm kind of dancing around the topic because I don't have a definite answer on it.
Right.
But I would say one solution to avoiding cliches is to stop yourself at the first, like try to think beyond the first solution.
And I tell my students, and this isn't my original idea. I think I stole it from somewhere. Your first idea is crap. And it's not that it's a bad idea. It's just that it is so likely to be the same idea as so many other people that it'll be cliche because you didn't work very hard to get there. I think our brains, lazy is the wrong word. Efficient is probably the right word. But our brains and our muscles, like your heart and everything, your heart is going to be as strong as it needs to be, and no stronger, right? And the only way to strengthen your heart is to increase the amount of stress that you put on your heart through exercise and things like that. And then it's going to say, okay, now this is the new normal, so I'll beat that hard. And your brain is the same way. If you never push your brain past the initial idea, it will never give you anything other than the cliche, right?
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, I think that cliche is a step in the right direction. It's just not going far enough. And so when I'm teaching kind of concepting, design thinking methodologies, creative concepting, all the mind maps and blackout poetry and all that stuff that you do to try to get somewhere, that first idea isn't a bad idea. It's just the same idea that everybody else is going to have. But that doesn't mean there isn't something to it. And so go in that direction, but go way past it. And at some point in time, you're going to go a step or two too far where it's just nonsense. And if you pull back from the nonsense, right on the edge of the nonsense, way past that cliche, but on the same road, is usually a good idea. That's usually where most people find it, is right on the edge of nonsense, but way past the cliche. And so if everybody looks at it and is like, oh man, I wish I would have thought of that, because they get it really fast, that means it's communicating clearly, but it's unique enough that it's enviable. People are envious of it or jealous of it.
Yeah. So I would totally reiterate that, and I'd also say when coming up with story for cartooning, whether it's like a superhero comic or whatever, try not to be too derivative. And I think that's where we start getting into, using pre-existing symbols. It's like you want to think about what story beats and images have been kind of played to death. And then if you're going to use stuff that's been played to death and been used a lot, at least when you go into it, you can go into it with intention.
Right.
Because there are some cliches that are cliches for a reason, because they work. And I think sometimes some of the most poignant stories or poignant story moments aren't so much like the most original, but they're very authentic in their presentation or intentional in their
Right.
presentation, where you can pull on a cliche and turn it on its head and kind of create something unexpected, or you can like find some kind of juxtaposition to put in there so that there's a higher concept that's a little further than the obvious. And I think that those things really enrich the cliche or the symbol. So,
let me throw something out there. I'm curious on what you think about this.
yeah,
How much do you think the quality of the execution comes into play? And I'll ask that question this way: The Lion King is a fantastic movie, right? Really well executed. The story beats are right on. Like it's just beautiful. I mean, tons of animators harken back to The Lion King as the thing that caused them to want to get into animation. And if you look barely beneath the surface, and I mean just barely, it's literally just the story of Hamlet. That's all
yeah,
it is, you know. And they just took a Shakespearean play and they said one thing: what if it were lions? That
yeah,
was the only change they made. Beyond that, and then they tweaked some things, but the execution of it was done so well that it kind of overcame that cliche. It overcame that trope. And so I'm
yeah.
curious on what you think. Can you use a cliche thing, but you do it so well that it becomes original?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can do that. I think another case in point is like this weird thing that I was noticing on sitcoms, um, where I really loved Seinfeld. I think it's brilliant, and I think Curb Your Enthusiasm's brilliant. I think just the humor of that writer is pretty incredible. But I also for a little bit really got into like How I Met Your Mother, and I was noticing these comedies, even the ones that were unexpected. I started like breaking it down and realizing that all of the characters in most comedies could be boiled down to like the character traits in the cast of Peanuts by
Yeah.
Charles Schultz. And I started seeing Peanuts in like everything, where I was like, oh my gosh, it's all the Peanuts characters. And it's just basically like Peanuts like grown up as adults, or Peanut like every single character was like straight out of Schutz's comic. And it was this weird thing of wondering where Peanuts was looking for those tropes and characters and stereotypes. And weirdly enough, they pushed beyond that. But it is interesting, like how many situational group stories that are group comedies harken back to like the Peanuts comics. And so to me, I think having a similar framework or even similar characters and stuff like that can be a really smart way to go, because like those paths are kind of laid out for you. That I think going with like a Shakespearean story arc is a good way to go if you're lost for story, or you're finding your story doesn't have a lot of structure. Um, and sometimes like mixing it and just kind of mixing it up and being like, well, what if that were, like doing what wasn't like Lucas looking at like Seven Samurai and
Yeah.
just kind
Well,
of
I
like,
mean,
what
he had
put that in outer space?
yeah, he lifted entire scenes from Akira Kurosawa. So for those of you that don't know, Akira Kurosawa is one of the best filmmakers that has ever lived, and used to do oil paintings of his storyboards. Like his storyboards were oil paintings, and he was an incredible person. But there is a scene in Yojimbo, which means the bodyguard, right? There's this bodyguard where they are in a bar, and the samurai walks in, and somebody basically says, "Hey, we don't serve your kind here." There's a scuffle. He cuts the guy's hand off while the band is playing in the background. It's the cantina scene. It is
Yeah.
straight up a lift, right? But he did it pretty well. And then Seven Samurai is another one, and then there are even parts of Rashomon that kind of made it in. And then as far as like Jedi philosophy, is kind of like Buddhism light. He basically just took like the Buddhist religion, mixed in a little like Hollywood liberal in there, and that's what the Jedi believe. And so like a lot of what Lucas did was like cliches from other things that were done really well, and
Yeah.
then he just changed it and put it in space. And they call it a space opera because it follows the format of like an opera. It
Yeah.
just happens in space, and then so somebody was like, well, let's coin that or whatever. And so yeah, I mean, and you look at you even look at um, Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones is a straight lift from H. Rider Haggard's Alan Quatermain, right? Most people might know Alan Quatermain from A League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but Alan Quatermain is the original, like gentleman scholar, kind of ruffian rogue type guy, and he goes in and he finds this lost world. Like H. Rider Haggard like invented this lost world trope, and I mean people like like the Lord of the Rings has characters that are based on H. Rider Haggard characters, and like
Yeah.
Tolkien and Tolstoy and those guys just straight up came out and said, "Oh yeah, that's like Galadriel is Aisha, and that's it." And so it is
Yeah.
interesting to see like a lot of the stuff that we take as like super original and groundbreaking was also based off of and a transformation of older stuff. And I don't know where H. Rider Haggard got it. I mean, who's to say he didn't like lift something from some Egyptian parable or something, I mean, but
Yeah.
I actually haven't looked into that. But it's interesting to see that you can kind of trace the roots of a lot of the popular culture that people say are like super original,
Yeah.
back to other things that other people also said are super original.
Yeah, like I mean, Tolkien was like lifting whole parts from the ring cycle too. I mean, it's like it's a weird um it's a weird world of influence. And so I think the catch is, to try to kind of make it like it ties back to one of the themes we always repeat, which is authenticity, being kind of authentic to the story that you want to tell, to the things that you love, and kind of trying to bring that authenticity to your work, because that by nature, um, like just thinking about like when I'm writing music with the band that I'm recording with tomorrow, it's like I was really into post hardcore, but mixed in there, I was really into underground hip hop. I'm really into indie rock. I like really, really fell in love with like the Pixies and Pavement. And so, like, there's these weird kind of pulls from all these different people that I really liked different kinds of guitar work from. And so when I'm noodling and writing stuff, I'm sure subconsciously all of that stuff is like fueling what we're writing. And there's not a point where I'm trying to make a song that sounds like this band.
Right.
um, I'm trying to make a song that feels like this band but sounds like this band, but like mixes with these other things and bringing all these different things that I like to it. And that's kind of what I think makes it more authentic than just being like a really bad kind of um, attempt at like copying a band you like, or copying art you like. And some of that does start by copying. I mean, we've talked about that a little bit, but I know when I was a kid, I used to stay up really late at night, and I would take I think John Romita Jr. art from Spider-Man, and I would look at his cover work, and then I would like try to replicate the lines and like copy it exactly. And I would just spend hours doing that with comics that I liked. When I was younger than that, I used to look at like Calvin and Hobbes and just kind of like draw Calvin and draw Hobbes, you know. Even younger than that, I remember looking at Harold and the Purple Crayon and trying to repeat what Harold was doing later on, only to find out that it turns out that guy was a cartoonist, a syndicated cartoonist, um, the guy who created Harold and the Purple Crayon.
Uh-huh.
But what's interesting is you kind of do start like that, and hopefully don't keep like that. I think
Right.
for because we're not copy machines. We're artists, and
Right,
I
and I
think
think
what
I think
people
anytime you strive to be that,
yeah
you and I were talking about Sean Gordon Murphy before we went live. He's got an interesting story that he tells, and I don't know if you've listened to this episode or not, but where he talks about how he was trying to do other things. Right? He has a, I don't know how you describe his style, but it's an exceptionally energetic inking line,
Yeah.
almost messy,
Yeah.
you know, but super controlled, and it's fascinating. I've got a couple of pieces of his you can see right there. There's a few of them, but he was talking, and I can't remember who he was talking about, but he was working on American Vampire, and he kept getting notes back from his editor, you know, hey, make this more like so and so. You know, could you clean this up and make it more like so and so? And at one point in time, he just basically swore at her and said, "I'm not effing so and so," you know, and that was when his art kind of, when he claims that his art kind of like was unshackled and he was able to kind of be himself as an artist.
Yeah.
Was when he stopped attempting to try to be like somebody else, and it's an interesting thing because in copying other people's work, you shouldn't do that professionally, and I'm not even sure that you should share that publicly, but you do gain a certain set of skills. You gain a feeling in your hand, and then once you leave that behind and you allow yourself to be yourself, you retain those abilities, but you approach them in a different way. And I remember I have always been very impressed with the painterly style that a lot of digital artists are able to get.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at like Saga or Tale of Sand, or you know, like those type of things where, you know, it's you don't see the ink line.
Yeah.
You know, and I had tried to do that for years, and in my master's I was still trying to do that. And I remember this one professor, he said, "Hey, I've seen countless students waste themselves away trying to be something that they're not." You know, and in essence, what he was trying to say is you're not gonna be that. That's not who you are. And he said, instead of trying to go against the grain, you should just accept the artist that you are and be the best version of that. And
Yeah.
actually, that was the first time, because I was kind of because I was a little bit in a fine art world. I was a little bit in a, you know, liberal arts academy, that type of thing, and I don't know if ashamed is too strong, but I was a little bit embarrassed of kind of an inking style where everybody described my style as like a comic book style.
Yeah.
Not that I was embarrassed of comic books or anything, but I really wanted to be able to produce more of a painterly style. But I don't know how to paint. I've never known how to paint. And as soon as he was like, your portfolio looks like it was done by 5 different people, poorly, like, you know, and he said, so like, pick what you gravitate to naturally, just get really good at that. And I'm not kidding, like within a week I had leveled up like 4 levels once I accepted like who I was. But I don't think any of that effort was lost, because I'm able to bring a lot of what I learned in that struggle and trying to copy and trying to push and trying to do that, that now I feel like I'm inking at a level that, you know, is pretty decent compared to, you know, the amount of time that I've spent doing it. And I think a lot of that is because I had a photography background and a videography background and a graphic design background, and then for a year or two I tried really hard to paint, and it just didn't ever take. And then when I finally hit the inks, like I always should have, I was able to kind of bring all that with me, and it's kind of an interesting thing. And so I think I have somewhat of an original style. Style is kind of a weird thing, but there's a lot of odd influences that you wouldn't think would be influences in there, like Dr. Seuss, and, you know, a lot of like super technical, you know, people, and, you know, you put that alongside like Sergio Tappi and Murphy and Crystal and all those guys, and it's like a weird mixed bag, but you're able to kind of just push into being your own. It's interesting.
Yeah. And I think I would agree with that, and it's funny because I relate to that a lot. Because when I was in grad school, and I think this might be just been the time that I was in there, but like there was a hesitance to kind of support anybody doing comics in the first place, And so I kept getting pushed in these different directions by my committee, and like one of the directions was painting. And it's funny because when I was painting, I had like, some of the top painting teachers at the school who were like trying to recruit me into their department because they were like, "You are a painter," and I was like, "Yeah, but I'm not." Like and the weird thing is, I do love painting, like I enjoy it,
Yeah.
but I don't. Something didn't click, and I had a very similar moment where I'd been pushed in so many directions, and I finally just kind of broke down and was like, "Look, I want to make black and white auto bio comics. Like I don't want to make color comics. I do color stuff all the time professionally. I don't know why I'm being pushed in that direction of color. I don't know why I'm being pushed in the direction of paint because I really like line. And what's funny was I kind of think a lot of that pushing might have had intention behind it. Because I do think part of what you do as an undergraduate is you're kind of like a sponge and you're absorbing as much as you possibly can. But as a graduate student, at that point, you're no longer really a sponge. You're supposed to be kind of like doing the thing you should do,
Yeah. Right.
And I kind of think that might have been a method of my committee at the time to kind of get you where your heart wants you to be, because that's what you should be doing in graduate school. Because it's like it's one of the few times in life where you're going to get an opportunity to just kind of work on whatever.
Yeah.
And so I I think that was really beneficial because ever since then, like the comics I've been making are the comics I wanted to make. And I feel like prior to that, most of what I was making, even the comics I was making, I was like making excuses for them not to be the thing that I felt like I should be making.
Yeah.
But along the way, you absorb all these different things, and weirdly enough, it becomes advantageous. Like at my job, it's really helpful that I can be a chameleon and I can kind of work in any style. So that's super helpful. And that's actually something I even bring into my own work. That's why I have like two different styles in the comic I'm working on. The one I'm doing for this anthology might be a totally different style.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that like that amalgamation of different styles and different interests and different loves, like that all kind of comes out as like something that's more authentic. And I think it starts happening when you finally stop thinking you have a style or caring if you have a style.
Yeah.
And then you just kind of end up with a style. Because I do know as a student, I did make, like, especially in undergrad, I made a lot of mistakes that I called style and were just terrible drawing habits.
Yeah.
And, I would justify, and as a teacher, I saw students do this too, like justify really bad drawing by being like, that's just my style.
That's
man.
my style.
It's all subjective, and you're like, no, like objectively, like that's wrong.
Yeah.
And but what's neat is like
once you finish a few thousand pages, then you can claim it's your style. But right now, it's just you're not good at it.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing about style. Like you kind of arrive at it whether you like it or not. And
Yeah.
I think very similarly, like when you start writing stuff and you start making art and you try to push beyond kind of the expected, you'll find yourself there. But this is kind of rambly, but I do feel like it's a tough topic when it's talking about kind of trying to go outside of cliches. But
Yeah.
if you are going to delve into cliches, I do think be aware of the cliche, use it to your advantage.
I think there's two big good rules of thumb if we want to end on some good rules of thumb when it comes to symbolism. One is the more general the symbol is, the more cliche and useless it's going to be. The other is the more unaware of it you are, the more it's going to come off as cliche. And so if you can get a very granular set of symbols, that can be used really, really well. And if you are aware that you are making a choice, and it's not a choice because you can't think of anything else, but it's a choice because you have multiple options that you've come up with, and you've decided that that is the best way for the mood, the tone, the story calls for it, and it communicates clearly, then that can be that can be used really effectively. But if you're not aware that it's cliche because you don't know, it's not a tool you're using. It's something that you're defaulting to. And if it's super general, and it's used all the time, and you're not aware of it, you're probably just grooved right into that trope, and you have no idea what's going on. And so I think, like anything else, I would always shoot for originality. But if you have, it's kind of like, if you know the rules, then you can know when to break them.
Exactly.
And so if you're aware of it, you can say, I realize that this is cliche, but I'm doing it here for the following reasons. And if that's honest and it's not a justification, then that's usually going to serve the story well.
Yeah. And sometimes like the cliches themselves can be great subject matter. I did a shirt design that went viral years ago called the League of Cliche Evil Supervillains.
Yep.
And it's still in print on Threadless, and that thing made me a decent amount of money. And it was literally just a day where I was like, there are all these cliche supervillains. They show up across genres, and I wonder if I could list them out. Has anyone done that? And I looked it up, and nobody had done it. And I was like, I'm going to do it as a floating head thing, because like all vintage comics had floating heads on the cover in my kid era, and it worked. And that was like a mix of, like, I was aware of the cliches. I tried to set it up in the most kind of cliche way, and it, it worked because I was aware of them. And like, so once again, don't avoid the cliche, embrace the cliche, and if you can, like, if nobody's riffed on it, maybe make a joke about it.
Yeah.
Make a design. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So there's a non-answer for everybody. It's as non-answer as I think we could get. If you want to check out my stuff. Oh, anybody? I don't have the chat pulled up. Anybody saying anything in the chat?
Tim just said hi. Hi, Tim. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, everybody in the chat. And if you want to be in the chat and you're watching this later, then get on YouTube. You can check us out at corykerr.com/48hr. You can always see what we're doing over there, and that'll have links to Josh's YouTube channel and my YouTube channel. If you want to check out my stuff, you can go to corykerr.com. And if you want to check out Josh's stuff, you can go to quarterlystories.com, and you can call us out on whether we're being cliche or not. And I'm sure we'd love to hear that in the comments. So we will see you guys in a couple days. We are out.
Bye.